And thank you for joining Congresswoman Finkenauer's virtual roundtable discussion on rural broadband deployment and distance learning. My name is Jared Mullendore, and I am Congresswoman Finkenauer's District Director, serving as a moderator today. Today's discussion will focus on needs and challenges concerning high-speed broadband internet access in rural places, covering distance learning efforts in Iowa schools, rural broadband deployment opportunities, and ongoing efforts in Congress to close the digital divide in rural areas. Questions will be directed to panelists, but all are encouraged to share their thoughts. Today, Congresswoman Finkenauer is joined by Representative James Clyburn, House Majority Whip and Chair of the Rural Broadband Task Force, as well as Mark Lane, who is the Superintendent of the Decorah Community School District, Joanne Gregorich, who is the General Manager of Lamont Telephone Company, and Michael Baumann, who is Congresswoman Finkenauer's Legislative Assistant covering broadband issues. With that, Congresswoman Finkenauer, I'd like to turn it over to you for introductory remarks.
Well, thank you, Jared, and thanks to all who are joining. I apologize for the little delay here. I had some technical difficulties this morning, which is a little bit apt for this discussion today. We are really happy to have Congressman Whip Clyburn here with us, joining us virtually, and talking about this important issue and making sure that we have connectivity all across the country, and especially in places like Iowa. But before we get into it, I would be remiss if I didn't say, we are trying to do the work of Congress that has been important for a number of years here. This is an issue that we've been working on for a long time that I know Whip Clyburn has championed for years. We are still in the middle of a global pandemic, and the fight against injustice in our country is real and continuing on as well during this time. And we must continue at the same time to work together to find solutions to these problems that have been plaguing our country for decades. And that's something that I've been honored to get to work with Whip Clyburn on for this last year and a half, and specifically on this topic as well that we're going to be talking about today on rural broadband. This is, one of those things that I know Whip Clyburn, again, has championed for a very long time because it shows up so big in his district, but then also districts like ours here in Iowa 1 and all across the country, showing the inequities of the digital divide and what that means for our communities when digital connectivity is not the same in our rural areas and our cities. Right now, I know, as I mentioned, we are through a global pandemic. And something that matters a great deal for us when we're moving through this pandemic and hopefully coming out of it eventually, that we make the right investments in our communities as we do. And so one of the things that I keep thinking about is, I go back to 2008 during the Great Recession and how communities, especially small towns, were left behind because most of the opportunities were in our bigger cities. And so folks left our small towns, went to the bigger cities for those opportunities. And now we're looking at a time in our country where folks may be thinking about moving back home to small towns or wanting to be able to have those opportunities back home. But right now, if we don't get this right on rural broadband, we are going to miss an opportunity to bring folks back home, to be able to have opportunities all across the country, not just in our bigger cities. And rural broadband plays a huge part of that. When we're talking about our education system, when we're talking about making sure that our hospitals have what they need in terms of telehealth, when we're making sure that our farmers have what they need in terms of precision agriculture. I think I already mentioned our schools. And then most importantly, right now, in the middle of this pandemic, our small businesses. I'm happy to chair on the Small Business Subcommittee, Rural Development, Ag, Trade, and Entrepreneurship. We've held hearings on this issue, and today we are so excited to have the champion himself, who's been just dedicated to this again for so long and heading up that Rural Broadband Task Force, who's done such great work and on so many issues. And again, on this one in particular, it is an honor, Whip Clyburn, to have you with us today, and also our panelists here as well, who are going to share their stories and their personal experiences. So thank you, thank you, thank you, Whip Clyburn. It is an honor, and thanks for being here. There we go.
Okay, you got me. Well, very much. Okay, very much again, thank you for having me, and thanks to all of you for participating. And I just want to say that I can have no better supporter than Abby Finkenauer when it comes to this issue. Let me say just a couple of things to you. My staff has prepared some talking points for me, but don't tell them that I'm not going to use them. I'm going to tell you a couple of things that really have crystallized this issue for me. The first one came about several years ago when I was participating with the what we call the rural cooperatives in my state. And they were celebrating an event, and I was doing a little bit of research for that event. I came upon a tabletop book that I have several copies of now, and it was called The Next Greatest Thing. And the reason that book was called The Next Greatest Thing is because as the co-ops got ready to celebrate the 50th anniversary of rural electrification, they decided to chronicle that 50-year event with a tabletop book. The name comes from a testimony that was being given in a rural Tennessee church one night when a man got up and said, "Brothers and sisters, I want to tell you this. The greatest thing on earth is to have the love of God in your heart. And the next greatest thing is to have electricity in your house." That man expressed what made the difference in rural America when we brought electricity to rural communities all over this country. It made the difference in the 20th century. And I have held on to that. And then let's fast forward to about 2 or 3 years ago, when I was meeting with a group of rural people from all over the country. They were basically farmers. And of course, if you recall, you had a big problem there in Iowa. Disaster relief was a big thing. And farmers from all over the country came to Washington and asked for a meeting with me. And I sat down with them, and they started telling me about their experiences and why they needed our help, because they had borrowed money to plant their crops the year before, and the floods came and destroyed the crops. Now they are back no longer creditworthy because they were not able to repay those loans and face another problem and wanted my help. But when it came time for a gentleman sitting right across the table from me to talk, he said to me, "Congressman," he said, "I came here to talk to you about disaster relief, but that's not what's on my heart." He said, "What's on my heart today are those families in my community who go off to work in the mornings, come back home in the afternoons and evenings. They load their children up into automobiles and take them down to the local library that's already closed, and they sit out in the parking lot to do their homework in their automobiles." He said, "This country should not allow that to happen." that struck me. I don't know why, but I just didn't realize that. So that night when I sat around with my little kitchen cabinet talking about how I needed to conduct myself in the Congress, I told them about this experience. And they said to me, man, that's commonplace. The children in my district, Sanford Bishop, who Abby knows, talked about rural Georgia, where he says the football team after practice, they'll all get on the school bus and go down to the local McDonald's and sit out in the parking lot to do their homework. At the football practice, they sit on the bus to do their homework. Others in the group talked about how children hung out at the fast food joints just to use the internet. And that just got to me. And I started talking to other members of Congress. And we decided to form this rural broadband task force and to lobby heavily for broadband being put on a level with all of other infrastructure projects. When we start talking about infrastructure, we immediately think about roads and bridges and water and sewage and ports and rail. But we call the internet the information highway. So I decided we ought to treat the information highway the same way we treat interstate highways. And that's what we have been doing. And now we got the White House's attention. We got the attention of the entire Congress. Now the HEROES Act, we are pushing $86 billion program so that to build out broadband throughout America. That's the only way we're going to have telehealth. That's the only way we'll have online learning. That's how we will have remote work. We know now from this pandemic that the best thing that we could do today is to have, or maybe the greatest thing, is to have broadband in every home. And so I'm so pleased that Abby has been a part of this effort. And let me close with this. I know when you put together a big bill like this, everybody says $86 billion, HEROES Act, $3 trillion. It's kind of interesting. But the day after we passed that in the House, and everybody was talking about how big a number that was, the chair of the Fed, Chairman Powell, said he did not think that $3 trillion was big enough. We cannot afford to allow this great economy to get so far in the hole that we cannot save this great country. This country is great, does not have to be made great. Our challenge is to make this country's greatness accessible and affordable by all of its citizens. That's what broadband is all about. Our healthcare system has been exposed by this pandemic as being needing repair. We have to do it. Broadband will give us telehealth. Here in South Carolina, the little piece of legislation that we passed in this HEROES Act, calling upon the FCC to bill out quickly that $20.4 billion that has got sitting there that they're thinking about billing out over a 2-year period. We put language in the HEROES Act saying, no, let's commit that money now and do it by June 30th. They say, well, we got to wait till the people get the maps, so everybody get the maps done. Well, some states have already done the mapping. I know we have in South Carolina. I think our share of that is around $620 million. South Carolina's $353 million. Our mapping is done, it's all ready. So if you got states where they've done good mapping, let's start committing that money to them now. Let's not wait until everybody get all the maps up to par before we start committing the money. So we are trying to do that. And I think that is what is going to be required if we are going to stay ahead of the game when it comes to rural broadband. And so I'm going to thank Abby for her good work. I want to thank all of you for the support that you've given her. She's just an incredible person to work with. And I'm hopeful that this bill that Representative Upton from Michigan, the Republican, this is a bipartisan bill. And I might say over 100 co-ops across the country have expressed support for this legislation. 9 of the co-ops here in South Carolina is supporting the legislation. Other Republicans, Trent from Mississippi, stopped me on the plane last week saying, I'm signing on to that bill. So this is unusual for me, but I'm doing it because this is what we need to do. So this is bipartisan, it is needed, and I think it is just what can bring us together in a bipartisan way to get things done that will allow us to move this country forward in a way that all of our constituents will feel that we're worthy of their support. Thank you so much, and I'll try to respond to any questions you have, and I'll let Abby answer them.
Oh, sorry about that. I unmuted myself. Thank you, Whip Clyburn, and so happy to have you and sharing your experiences and all of the work you've done on this issue. It's great to get to work together on it. And with that, I will let Jared introduce our panelists.
There we go. Sorry. Thank you, Congresswoman. Thank you, Congressman, for your remarks. We'd like now to hear from our panelists. If we could start with Mr. Mark Lane.
Good morning. Mark Lane. I'm currently the superintendent of schools with Decorah Community School District. I'd just like to begin by thanking Congressman Finkenauer and Congressman Clyburn. Thank you for making the time for this important topic today, and really appreciate Congressman Finkenauer, your staff reaching out to us here in Decorah. This isn't the first time I've heard from your staff and have been able to share feedback, and so appreciate you reaching out to your constituents here in Northeast Iowa. Decorah, we're a district of about 1,700 students in rural Northeast Iowa. Our district covers just over 300 square miles of Winneshiek County, which is right along the Iowa-Minnesota border. Decorah is the county seat of Winneshiek County with a population of right around 7,000. Decorah is the home to Luther College, which is a small liberal arts college here in Northeast Iowa. Part of the challenge of what we face is also one of the neat things about Decorah. We sit in an area called the Driftless region, which is in Northeast Iowa and then in the corner of Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Illinois, an area that was a little science lesson. It was untouched by glacial activity in the last ice age. So, which means we have lots of hills, lots of deep river valleys. And so that topography makes for great outdoor recreation and a beautiful landscape, but it contributes to the challenges we face with good internet service in this area. As a school district, the emergency closure, it did present unique challenges that we hadn't faced before, obviously. We're used to having students in our buildings and our staff in our buildings face to face. And so as we sent devices home with our staff and students, we came across many unique challenges. You know, one of the primary actions that we've taken during the emergency closure was our board quickly took action to install outdoor wireless antennas at our 5 campuses in our school district. As Whip Clyburn mentioned, that ability for students who don't have access at home to come to another location. Students can now be on campus at any of our campuses and accessing internet. And shortly after we had that installation, our high school principal did a survey of students, and we received positive feedback from students indicating that, you know, if they didn't have access at home, this was the primary source. They were coming and they could sit in the bleachers at the football field, or they could sit at a picnic table at the playground at one of our elementary buildings. And so another thing we learned from our survey was that our students were, that parents were taking students to their place of work to access internet, maybe off work hours. And so I think people are being creative in how they do that. I think one of the things that is exciting for us in Decorah is in the past, our board has taken action to be advanced with technology, to be a one-to-one district. And so we were in a great position. We issue an iPad to our elementary age students, and we issue a MacBook Air laptop computer to our secondary students. And so they have the device in hand on the first day of school. And so as the emergency closure went into effect in Iowa, we were fortunate to have those devices in students' hands. Not all school districts were able to do that, but it was then the access and the equity of access that created challenges for students. And I think one thing that I didn't necessarily anticipate right away was just the challenges for our staff as well. And I think that's more with that relation to just rural access. It's not necessarily financial constraints, but it might have more to do with just the availability of a wireless signal that supports the work that we do. And so we had staff and students that found it challenging to engage in things like what we're doing right now, a Zoom lesson with classmates and teachers. We had staff who, because of the service that they had in the area that they were living, I talked with one teacher and she shared that because of where she lives, if she wants to upload a video, we use a learning management system called Canvas. If she wants to upload a video that she's recorded of herself delivering a lesson, really the only time that she can do that is between like 2 and 6 in the morning, because that's when it's her internet has the capacity to do that. And then for some staff, it was just, it wasn't feasible for them to work from home, especially if they had school-age children. And so we did have great, I think people took action. 2 local providers, Mediacom and then Mabletel Cooperative out of Mabel, Minnesota. They were very cooperative with us and helpful in trying to support students and families in getting access. But I see that was really a temporary fix, and something that isn't necessarily a long-term solution, as I've heard talked about today. So I'll stop there and just look forward. I can share other details just as questions come along.
Thank you very much, Mark. If we could turn now to Joanne Gregorich with Lamont Telephone Company for her perspective. Joanne, there we go.
There we go. Good morning. Nice to see you again, Abby. Congressman Clyburn, it's very nice to have this opportunity to meet with you. I am Joanne Gregorich. I'm the general manager in the Lamont and Andrew telephone companies in Lamont and Andrew, Iowa. We are located approximately 15 miles south of the city of Dubuque in Jackson County. We are rural independent phone companies serving the communities of Lamont, Andrew, Swingle, and St. Donatus. And we serve over 1,000 households and business lines since 1953. Our company's, a little background, our company started because larger telecoms did not want to invest in our rural areas because, as in Decorah, we have hills, valleys, rocky terrain, and it's expensive to build out to a very rural setting. And the revenue that you would generate on a less populated area would not cover their investment. This presented an opportunity to the people in these communities, and we were able to serve, we started our own phone companies, and we were able to serve our residents the services they needed at prices that they could afford. The Lamont Telephone and the Andrew Telephone Company started as neighbors helping neighbors, and we've continued to live by that motto for the last 67 years that we've been in business. When I started with Lamont Telephone Company in 1999, we had plain old telephone service in the office and we did not have internet. And since that time, we've expanded our internet from a dial-up service to a gigabit of service to every customer who wants it. We've gone from offering the one simple phone line to digital television, as well as fixed internet, wireless internet services in the communities of Springbrook and Bellevue. 3 years ago, we began our fiber to the premise construction. This is a project that probably would not have been available to us without the Alternative Connect America Fund, also known as ACAM. The ACAM has made it possible for us to build fiber to every premise in our community. We are approximately have completed 95% of that build of fiber to the premise, and we're going to be finishing the last 5% this summer. Not only were we able to grow our own business, but we were able to assist our customers to help with their families and our businesses. The fiber to the premise has made it possible during the initial phases of the COVID pandemic. Our students from 4 primary school districts who reside in our communities to participate in the distant learning with access to online materials, classroom meetings. The college students who returned home could continue working toward their degrees, and the adults in our communities were able to continue working and earning a living from their homes. But our story does not end here. We continue to look for opportunities to serve our neighbors outside of our communities. We are very proud of our future-proof network, but we know we will need to continue to upgrade our electronic equipment that runs this fiber network. But we are just not in the fiber to the home business. We are in the customer service business as well. Our companies were founded to bring the best technology to our customers and neighbors at an affordable price. We are neighbors serving neighbors, and we know we can do it the best. So thank you for your service and listening to the needs of our customers and your hard work expediting the funding that we need to continue to serve our communities.
Thanks, Joanne.
Thank you, Joanne.
Yes.
Congressman Clyburn, I understand there is a leadership meeting upcoming here, and you'll need to hop off, but I did want, while we have you, to just ask one more question about the future and what lies ahead for the Rural Broadband Task Force in Congress, investing in broadband infrastructure.
Well, thank you for that. I think the most immediate thing is to really get past this bill that Upton and I are on. If I remember, I think, Abby, you are a co-sponsor of that legislation as well, but to accelerate the bill out of this $20.4 billion that's available. As I mentioned earlier, I think 620 million of that will be going to Iowa. I don't know how much Abby will get in her congressional district. Around 353 million comes to South Carolina. But already the co-ops, there's over nine co-ops in South Carolina, and 100 in the country have said that they want to get this done right away, because these are people, as the superintendent just mentioned, we're challenged in rural school districts here as well. In fact, we got a report 2 weeks ago here in South Carolina that hundreds of, really thousands of school children are not going to be eligible to go on to the next grade because of the loss of time this year. Those who did not have access to the internet could not participate in online learning. The ones who did have access did participate. They're moving on. They're going to leave these kids behind, and it's no fault of their own. And some of them, good students with no access to the information they need to qualify for the next grade. And if this virus revisits in the fall, as some experts think it will, that means these same children could lose another year of school. So we want the FCC to commit by June 30th to spending this money where the maps are already available. We've done all our mapping in South Carolina. The entire state has been mapped very effectively, very efficiently, and we can spend the money now. I don't know what may be the case in Iowa, but I don't think it's, is wise to stick with what your schedule was a year ago before this virus came upon us. Everybody else has got to make some adjustments and modifications now. That's what the school districts are doing. I think the FCC should be making some modifications as well. This legislation, I think, forces them to do that. Also, we ought to pass. I know when you lay out a $3 trillion program like the HEROES Act, it's time for us to negotiate. What should we do? When should we do it? How should we do it? And I think if we were to do that and make the adjustments we need for the experiences we're currently having, that makes all the sense in the world. So I think that taking pieces out of the HEROES Act and for standalone legislation and do it quickly is what we need to do.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Whip Clyburn. I couldn't agree with you more on that piece of it, of pulling that out. I think it's something that we can get bipartisan support on, and we are seeing it all across the country. We've been working with our colleagues across the aisle. More recently, I know we're getting, again, folks from all different political spectrums getting on board with it, but I know it has been something from the very beginning that you've championed and have not let up on. And I, again, can't thank you enough for that. My district can't thank you enough for that. We are at the point we are because of the work that's already been done by you, that the conversations you've gotten started for the last how many years. I know we've made so much progress with FCC in particular because of, I mean, heck, they already have, decided to change the way that they're mapping to make sure that we have more, accurate data. That was one of the things when I got sworn into Congress that we immediately went after, and we were happy to see they were able to make some of those changes on their own with enough pressure and support from folks. So, there is real movement here, and it's movement that needs to happen so that we know where those maps are, like you said, but we also can't afford to wait either. We've got to move forward here. Our communities can't afford it, especially, again, as I talked about at the beginning, moving out of this pandemic. We've got to get this right. The future of our small towns, of our rural areas depend on us getting it right. And I am honored to be in this work with you and for all that you've done. And I know you've got to run, but we're very grateful to have you here. Well,
thank you so much. I don't know the other emphasis. I'll just close with this. Education is very, very important. However, healthcare, we've got to look at that. We are not going to be able to do the testing that we need to do, the tracing, the isolating, the treatment. We cannot do that in view of COVID-19 without broadband. If we find someone who tests positive, we got to find out, where have you been? Who have you interacted with? And if you've been traveling throughout the rural communities, we are going to have broadband to facilitate that kind of effort. So this is all across the board. We shouldn't think about this in silos. Education is important, but so is healthcare. Our students are not going to do well in school if they aren't doing well health-wise. So let's just keep this in mind as we go forward. And thanks to all of you for all that you do to help us with this. I look forward to working with you.
Thank you, Clyburn. Enjoy your meeting. It won't be as fun as this, I promise.
I don't know how much you enjoy these leadership meetings, but I'll do my best.
Take care, Whip Clyburn.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Well, I think we are back. Jared, are you still there? Do we have everybody?
Yes.
Okay, and I'm unmuted, correct? Okay, good. Mark and Joanne, if you don't mind, I know Whip Clyburn had to jump off, but I've got some questions for both of you guys just about kind of your experiences and some specific points that I think would be interesting for not only myself to hear, but anybody watching right now as well. And making sure that we're, again, learning as much as we can and moving forward in the right way. So my first question I have is actually for Joanne, if that's okay. Your company, I know, provides services like fiber to the home, to your customers, as you talked about. And I'm just kind of wondering, I know you talked about this, in your statement at the beginning, but can you elaborate a little bit more about your experience providing high-speed broadband in rural areas and really, what those barriers are? I know you touched on it at the beginning, but if you can elaborate a little bit more as well and what it means on the ground.
I'll be happy to do, Abby. Building a fiber network out in a rural area is labor intensive and very expensive. We have hills, valleys, and in Jackson County, we have a lot of rock. It takes time, planning, engineering to get this project coordinated and out to our customers. It's not a fast project. I know that Congressman Clyburn wants to expedite this process, but in Jackson County, construction season is about 3 or 4 months. And so you have to make your time count, and contractors are usually booked in a year in advance. So it's difficult to do this quickly. And when you're doing a network and you're spending, Lamont and Andrew Telephone Company have spent over $8 million providing broadband to our customers. And when you're spending that kind of money, you want to make sure that you're taking the time to do it correctly. We did not do aerial fiber to the home. Iowa, the weather in Iowa is volatile, changes hourly basically. And we felt that buried fiber cable is the best way to, as I said before, future-proof the cable. It keeps from damages from wind and ice and target practice. But we felt that the buried cable was the best method to do this. And like I said, it does take time to do this and coordination. Did that answer your question, Abby?
No, it does. And you hit on so many things that, again, although there are representatives from all over the country who care about this issue, like Congressman Clyburn and I both do, the climate in South Carolina is a little bit different than it is here in Iowa. And so it's important. I mean, this is why I'm excited about the folks that are on that rural broadband task force, because we're able to bring these different perspectives of what people are actually dealing with on the ground and what those challenges are, because they are different as we approach this, and it's important we keep them all in mind. So you highlighting that it's truly very, very helpful. So thank you for that perspective. And also we've got Mark on here as well still, I think. And I've got an interesting question for Mark, just because as Joanne understands as well, when it comes to connectivity, it's not just about having access, it's also about the quality of it as well. And the reliability of it. And that's something we've been really trying to hit on, to show the differences of where assistance is needed throughout the country. And so I'm kind of wondering for you, if you can give us any stories, or if you've got any feedback from what you've heard from students or teachers who've been distance learning and they're at home doing it, but then you also have maybe a parent working from home as well, using the internet. And so have you heard quality issues and that type of thing, speed issues, all of that?
Yeah, definitely. I think for folks that live, in our most rural parts of our school district, a consistent message that I've heard is that their current internet service is satellite internet through a service called HughesNet, and some of the issues that has presented has been a challenge, whether and especially for our teachers that also have children that attend our schools, where the ability to engage in the platforms that we're using for distance learning do several things. They either eat up their monthly data really, really quickly, so they're paying for a certain amount of data per month, and as we move to distance learning, that data was exhausted in the first week of distance learning. A term that I learned from one of our middle school teachers who has satellite internet was this idea of signal latency. And so his ability to engage, if a principal was engaging in a staff meeting and trying to bring together a staff via a Zoom meeting, the ability to engage from home in that Zoom staff meeting to talk about our plan for continuous learning. That wasn't possible from home. Staff were having to, to find another way to access that. That might be through coming into the building, which we wanted to make feasible, but we also wanted to do that in a safe way that allowed for people to practice social distancing, that didn't leave children unsupervised at home when school was closed. And then again, I talked about just that ability to manage online learning. If the need is to upload videos, to upload content, finding the time when the signal to their home had the capacity to do that might mean doing that in the middle of the night or getting started and losing connectivity. And for those same reasons that you talked about, Joanne mentioned the Iowa weather, right? With the satellite internet, weather outages can occur frequently. One of our teachers shared a story of I don't know if it was last summer or in past summer, just conversation with their provider about even the interference as the corn gets taller, right? If we're having a great corn year in Iowa, it's not the internet signal year in Iowa. And so that was really fascinating to me to learn that. And we're up here in the corner of the state with Minnesota and Wisconsin. And so we have folks who live on the Iowa side of the border, but maybe work with Mabletel out of Maple with Minnesota, or with the cooperative out of Harmony, Minnesota. And so I believe it's Harmony, Minnesota has worked as a cooperative to install a service called My Broadband. And they're doing that. It's, as Joanne mentioned, it sounds like it's an expensive process. And so I talked with two teachers who have students in our district. One lives down in a valley and one lives up on a hill. And one is able to access this My Broadband through Harmony's service. The one who lives about a mile away down in the valley, it's just not an option for her family yet right now. And so that capacity, it's hit or miss, and really just depends on where you live. And that was something, I think going into this, I really saw it more as our equity and our access with internet, that it would be tied more to things like free and reduced lunch, our families that maybe couldn't afford it. And that's true too. There are families that needed assistance because of cost, but then there were families that could afford it, but they just didn't have access.
Yep. And again, there's just so much work to be done on that end to make sure that we have those opportunities where folks can live, again, we keep talking about this, but can live in rural Iowa or in rural areas where they maybe grew up and want to come back home and have those opportunities. And right now, without the digital connectivity, it's tough. And I know I was talking to somebody, early on, when we started talking about broadband, it was, I think it was one of the companies who was working on expanding it into Vinton, which is one of our small towns. And I think they were telling a story about a mayor and a realtor, and basically said they'd rather be able to, it's easier to sell a house that doesn't have running water than it would be to have one that doesn't have broadband or connectivity, because it is just in that much demand, and also just so essential for our families, but also our economic side of things as well. In a time like this, where people are trying to be creative of working from home, and now you also have a lot of businesses possibly coming out of this pandemic who are wondering about transitioning to work from home if that does work for their employees, and that also means we can have more opportunities back here as well. So yeah, thank you so much for that perspective on the education side of things. It is incredibly important. We do not let up on that end. And then Joanne, switching gears just a little bit here. One of the jobs, or one of the things that we do in Congress is play oversight here with some of the different agencies, and the FCC is one of those where we are really trying to make sure that they're doing what they should. And that, for example, the map side of things, where we fought to make sure those maps are accurate. And as we saw for years, they were not. They were showing whole blocks had connectivity when really only one house in the block did. And that's something we've been working to fix. But I'm curious really what your experience has been working with the FCC in terms of getting help with deployment of broadband and fiber, and anything you'd like to make sure that we know that we can follow up on, and just your personal experience working with them.
Well, I really don't have personal experience with the FCC. I have been working on the Rural Opportunity Auction,
Yep.
the RDOF, and the FCC maps that we are supposed to be using to determine if we are able to provide broadband in those areas, or what the funding would be for those areas, and the number of locations in those areas. A lady in the office and I, we have spent countless hours working with that map, trying to ascertain exactly where these areas are, what the locations are, if there is service there. It's not always clear if it's underserved area or if it's a non-served area.
Yeah.
So the mapping, I know that Congressman Clyburn in South Carolina has their mapping under control. I'm very impressed.
Yes.
We do use the report that we send out, the 477, to report our data. It's not always up to date. It's not possible to do that. But I think that the FCC, maybe we need to do a little more verification and challenging to these maps, so that we get the data a little more correct. So we aren't spending taxpayer dollars on twice in the same area, and able to get, so that we can get to these customers that live in I do fixed wireless, so I understand what Mark was saying about the customer in the valley couldn't have service, but the customer on the hill could have service. And the corn, that is a true issue. So fixed wireless is a wonderful Band-Aid, but it is not the answer to our problem. And so as we're looking at the maps and trying to determine who we can get to and serve, it is a struggle.
Yeah, exactly. And I know the solution there, right, is to be able to lay that fiber, to be able to have connectivity. And as you said, that can sometimes be a slow process because of construction restraints, and especially in places like Iowa where that season's shorter. But we've got to be trying everything we can in the meantime to be able to get our kids and our hospitals access as well, and our farmers in particular too. That's something we had the chairwoman from FCC out here looking at, just hearing from Iowans in particular, just about, how this affects our school districts, how it affects healthcare. And then we also had her out on a farm. I believe we were in Dyersville, and there was a group of us just kind of talking about, again, precision agriculture and how important it is to have connectivity, but then also for our pork producers as well, who know down to the penny, how much they're putting into the hog, what they're going to be getting back. And, it's all mapped out for them. And so we had her check out something like that, where the young man was with his father. There was kind of next generation farmer, and he pulls out his iPad to show the chairwoman, what this looked like and how they were tracking everything. And as he pulls out the iPad and tries to load it, it did not load. And so it was a perfect example for her to see, again, why this was important. And again, the area that we were in, definitely lots of hills and valleys. And, I like to say, and I'm a little bit biased, but I mean it, I have one of the most beautiful districts in the country, and definitely, right up there with one of the beautiful districts in Iowa, with being in, the hills and valleys and on the Mississippi. It's gorgeous. But again, as you both have pointed out, definitely can cause some issues when it comes to connectivity. And we have a little bit different challenges here that we've got to be addressing.
Right.
But again, as we do that, we still have to, make way for what we do have right now, and try to get the equipment into the hands of our students and our teachers who need it most. And so kind of wondering with our superintendent here, Mark, if you'd be able to give me some feedback here. I'm a co-sponsor of the Emergency Educational Connections Act of 2020, and that would create a $2 billion emergency connectivity fund at the FCC to help schools and libraries then purchase Wi-Fi hotspots, modems, routers, internet connected devices for students and also teachers, and wondering what that would mean, if that would be helpful in the meantime, or just kind of your thoughts on that.
I do think that would be helpful. I think that's another just another avenue that school districts in Iowa are taking. Our first step was the installation of our outdoor wireless network. That was really our first response, and our technology director, Kurt DeVore, and I have talked about sort of that next step of what does it look like to have hotspots, and especially as we think about that financial challenge for families. And being able to support, as Whip Clyburn talked about, it can't be an access issue that keeps a student from learning. And as we moved to continuous learning in Iowa, right, school districts in Iowa were given an option. This can be voluntary, or this can be required, or it can be a blended model. And in Decorah, we went to a blended model where with our younger students, K-8, it was voluntary learning. And at our high school, 9-12, we did required learning. And I think we were in the minority of the 300 and some school districts in Iowa. Not a lot went to a required model. And I think the internet access, the equity issue was a big roadblock for districts. Thankfully, we had the technology in place, and we could do some steps to put Band-Aids on and do short-term fixes, as Joanne talked about. But things like hotspots, things like we're even thinking about, if we're under a continuous learning model next year, how might we, at least with social distancing and appropriate mitigation, how do we open our spaces? Because the outdoor wireless is fun in the summer in Decorah, but it wouldn't be great in January and February to sit out on the playground. And so we have to think about just as many options as we can put in place. And I think, that's when something like this happens, I think communities look to their school, right, for lots of things. And this isn't in our wheelhouse. And so I really appreciate Joanne and you, Abby, of being able to rely on partners and to collaborate, because this isn't a problem that school districts, we can't solve this on our own in the long term for people.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for everything that you've shared and the perspective you've given me. And also Joanne, thank you so much. And as you said, the partnership that our rural electrical cooperatives have also played with our schools during this time is extraordinary. And there's still plenty more work to do. We're committed to doing that work on the congressional level, and having allies like Whip Clyburn is something that will be huge for Iowa and for our country when it comes to broadband. He's been just so dedicated, like I said, for years here, and so important that we continue to have forward progress on this. We cannot afford to move backwards. We've got to, especially right now, continue to push. So thank you for all that you guys do. And I know we are over time right now, but I just again want to say I'm grateful that you guys took time out of your day to join us, to have this conversation, to bring more awareness to it, and to give me feedback as well that I can take back and continue to look at things moving forward to make sure we're getting our communities what they need. We're happy, on the CARES Act side of things, to be able to provide the state those dollars. I think it was $26.2 million then that has gone out to our school districts to help with connectivity issues and make sure our kids have what they need. But again, we just have so much more work to do. And we, especially as we look forward here and, the future, and making sure that whether we're still dealing with aspects of this pandemic come the fall, or what learning looks like then, there may be changes made. We don't know, but we've got to make sure that our kids have what they need, and that you guys and the school district have what they need. So thank you, Joanne, for being a great partner in that as well, for our folks across Iowa. And, we will continue to move ahead here. And, please do not hesitate to reach out if there are things that come up, or questions, or just, where there are more anecdotes or stories like you've told about the households, and, people, you'd think they'd be able to have access to it, and then you hear later they don't, and having to be up in the middle of the night to get things done. Make sure that we're hearing those, because those are the types of stories too that I can work with my colleagues on, and that I always find can sometimes move them more than even the data. So thank you again, and I hope you all are staying well. And again, it's an honor to get to do this with you, and hopefully one of these days I get to see you in person. So thank you. Take care, everybody, and stay well.
Same to you, Abby.